Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Luis Fernandez. Half of North Carolina's delegation to the U.S. House of Representatives owns stocks, and some are potentially making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on those trades. That's according to a review of public records. This review comes as the U.S. House of Representatives passes a bill that would ban the future purchasing of stocks. But there's a lot more to this potential new law than a headline would tell you. I spoke with WRAL State government reporter Will Doran about all this. Here's our conversation. Will, this is definitely something I think that's caught the attention of a lot of people. First off, I think it's always, if you're not within media or something along those lines, sometimes you forget what information is publicly available.
Right.
And there's a lot that we can know about what our state representatives are doing. Can you tell me a little bit about what information is public?
Yeah, now, they don't make this easy to find, and they don't make it easy to analyze, but it is out there. So if you know how to do it, you can figure this all out, or you can just go and read our article because we already did all the math for you.
We did the homework for you.
Let me tell you, it took hours.
Yeah, I bet.
But no, you can look at, all of basically the assets and liabilities and income streams that all of our politicians have. So you can see, obviously they all get a salary for Congress, but a lot of them have jobs of their own on the side, or they have investments, which could be, in a business or in a mutual fund or in individual stocks. You can see how much they have in loans, whether that's, for their business, for a house, for a car, whatever. None of this is reported in exact dollar amounts. It's all in ranges. So, if people go and look at our article, it's going to say, they, made up to X amount of dollars trading stocks. We don't know exactly how much they made, but, on the high end, it could have been as much as, in a few cases, six figures, 100,000 for a few people, over 300,000 for one of our members, trading stocks on this. So we don't know exactly how much, but we know that at least for some of them, pretty sizable amount.
General frames, like you
correct, and these come out every year. So for most of the people, we have their 2025 numbers that we've been looking at.
Okay, cool. Good context there. And if you've been paying attention to some of the national headlines, the inspiration behind this investigation, this bill that just passed the House earlier this week. We are recording this on Friday, July. I have to check and make sure. 24th. There we go. Friday, July 24th. This is, on the surface, a very popular topic. Polls show that the vast majority of Americans are for some kind of stock trading ban with members of Congress.
Yeah, when you say vast majority, this polls at like 85, 90%.
Whatever like the next phrase past vast majority is.
Right. It's near unanimous support.
You've got an A or a B on a test, essentially. There are a lot of layers to the reasoning behind this new law. There are a lot of layers to what this bill that has passed the House actually is. Why is this not a slam dunk? Why are there some people upset about what this appears to be on the surface?
Well, there's basically two reasons why people are mad about the bill that the House just passed. And if you actually go and look at the vote breakdown, all of the Republicans voted for it, but almost all of the Democrats voted against it. One of our Democrats here in North Carolina, Don Davis, did vote for it. He's in a competitive district out east. And there's two reasons why Democrats are mad about this. One, they say that Republicans basically just watered down this bill because it is not actually a full ban on stock trading. Members would still be allowed to trade stocks. They would just have to have a little bit more restrictions on what they currently have. So not a full ban, it's just basically slightly stricter rules than what are currently in place in terms of both buying and selling. Two, they also stuck in completely unrelated provisions on voter ID from the SAVE Act that President Trump has been pushing for. And we already know that has failed to move in the Senate. It can't get past the filibuster because Republicans don't have enough members in the Senate because this is a controversial provision. And so by sticking this completely unrelated voter ID thing in there that already exists in other laws into this bill, it just guarantees that it's doomed and it's not going to go anywhere and it'll never become law.
Yeah. The restrictions that you mentioned there at the beginning, let's dive into that just for a second, because correct me if I'm wrong here, but essentially it's you cannot buy any new stocks.
Correct.
But it is not you have to get rid of what you currently own. You can still continue to trade that.
Yes, you would have to put, more notice on it. I think that if you wanted to sell your stocks, you would have to kind of give advance notice, say, hey, I'm going to sell my stocks in a week, so that you couldn't sit there and just day trade like we see some members of the North Carolina delegation do. I mean, you look at, because these financial disclosures I've been looking for this article, and you can see, they're trading stocks, some of them every single day or just about every single day. And a lot of them is the same stock. They're buying it, selling it, buying it, selling it, buying it, selling it back and forth, just trying to play those margins. And some of them done quite well for themselves. So this bill would stop activities like that, but it wouldn't stop in general people from trading stocks. It would just be a little harder, but you wouldn't have to, put it in a blind trust or sell all of your holdings or anything like that.
So now that we've established that, what did the WRAL analysis reveal about some of the state's leading politicians? The two senators, I think, stand out. Do you want to talk about them to begin with?
Yeah, I think actually a lot of people will be surprised. Some of us here in the newsroom were surprised. Most of our members of Congress actually don't own individual stocks. Most of them are invested in the market somehow, usually with mutual funds, ETFs, things like that.
Sure.
There's a few who actually don't really have any investments, but that's rare. Most of them have at least some sort of, retirement account, like
Sure.
most of us do.
Yeah, like so many people with 401ks.
Exactly. Neither of our senators owns any stocks.
Wow.
Tom Tillis, Ted Budd don't have any stocks. They're just in mutual funds. Now they've got, quite a bit of money in other investments, but you basically have to be a millionaire to run for office. So, let's just take that as kind of the base level here.
Sure.
If you look at the House delegation, we have 14 members in the House, and it is evenly split. 7 of them own stocks, 7 of them do not own stocks. But if you look at the people who own stocks, there's actually a pretty big partisan divide. It's 6 Republicans and 1 Democrat. Then let's break that down a little bit more, because just because you own stocks or your spouse owns stocks doesn't mean that you're actually trading them. And of those 7, 3 of them are not actively trading at all. They're just sitting on their holdings. They own stocks, yes, but in, the entire, annual period that we looked at, they didn't have a single transaction. But there are 4 of them, all Republicans, who are actively trading, including 2 of them, Mark Harris and Tim Moore, both from the Charlotte area, who are really actively trading, like day trading, essentially.
The question with all of this, if people have not been paying attention to this conversation regarding representatives who are actively invested in the stock market, why is this such a big political talking point at this time? Why do people care so much about this topic?
Well, actually, we talked to a professor from UNC Charlotte who is an expert in Congress and political corruption.
Wow.
Which,
That's a very specific expertise.
It's very specific, but it's very important that, we study these things. And he told us exactly why people do care about this and why, if you don't care about it, you probably should. Let's hear from him.
Public officials vote on legislation and sometimes contracts directly that benefit specific companies and specific industries. And having knowledge about how the changes in the law would affect those particular industries is going to be a major advantage in knowing where you can make money and knowing the timing of when legislation is likely to pass or when policies are likely to be implemented by the executive branch is a major advantage in figuring out when you buy and sell to maximize the profits you would take. So given the public officials have this informational advantage, this power advantage over the industries that are being affected by their legislation, it's in the public interest that they separate their ability to make money from their ability to make decisions that affect the value and worth of the companies and the investments that all other stockholders have in those companies.
So, there you have kind of the argument for, hey, this is why this is bad, conflict of interest, right? If your representative has a choice and if they vote one way, it's going to help them, but if they vote another way, it's going to help their community. A lot of people fear that oftentimes they're going to help themselves. So if you put a ban in place that takes that decision out of the equation,
right,
and you can say, we're just going to trust them to do what's best,
right,
without having that, little devil on their shoulder saying,
It's not to say that anyone who's representing within Congress or whatever is going to be doing like the corrupt bad thing or whatever it might be. It's more of making sure that's not even a decision that's on the table.
Exactly. And, a lot of times, you hear the phrase, like a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest. And the whole idea behind a ban really is to get rid of both. And that's what we heard from Representative Greg Murphy. He's one of our Republicans who represents North Carolina in the House. He's a doctor from Greenville. He doesn't own any stocks. And he came out and said, yes, like it's kind of crazy that we haven't done this. We need to do this. I don't own any stocks. I don't think anybody else should. It just gives such a bad impression. Even if nothing untoward is actually happening, people just assume that it is. So what I did was we reached out to all of the Republicans who have stocks and who voted for this ban and asked them, okay, this ban, because of the way that, GOP leadership wrote it, highly unlikely to become law. But you support it, so will you commit to following these rules in the future, even if it doesn't become law? Will you agree to put these restrictions on yourself that you voted for and said are a good idea?
Not to rely upon a law to make you do this thing.
Right. Will you just pledge to do it? None of them have responded to us. So, you can take your own inferences from that. And, we'll report it if any of them do and say that, they are going to, actually follow these rules. But, I think it's probably a long shot.
Interesting. So I guess, the question becomes now, where do things go from here? It seems like from the law perspective that the House passed the bill, it feels very unlikely to pass the Senate from the way you're describing it. What happens next?
Yeah. What could happen next is they just go back and they take a vote on the actual standalone policy without tying all this other stuff into it. We actually heard from at least one Republican, Thomas Massey.
Yeah.
Of course, he just lost his primary. It's kind of on
he's
the outs with the party.
Yeah, in general.
But, he said, look, we intentionally sabotaged this. If we just run it back without all the SAVE Act stuff in there, just do a vote on banning these stock trades, it would pass with broad bipartisan support. It would pass the Senate. President Trump would sign it into law because Trump has said, he said in the State of Union that he supported a ban on Congress, not a ban on the president trading stocks, but a ban on Congress.
Which is an interesting, I just kind of circling back to the bill itself that has passed the House. Mm-hmm. How does it impact the executive branch?
It does not impact the executive branch.
So that is an interesting, where there not be a ban from a president or vice president per se to be making these trades or things like that.
Right, and people could read into that and say, oh, well, this is just congressional Republicans kowtowing to Trump and letting him do whatever he wants. But there's also legitimate separation of powers questions.
Sure.
Can Congress tell the president, what
to do,
what he can or can't do with his own money?
Right.
I don't know. That would almost certainly end up in court, and the Supreme Court would decide. So,
and regardless, once again, it kind of circles back to this point that the bill itself that passed the House is very layered and very convoluted in a lot of different ways. This is definitely, like we mentioned, with the popularity of something like this. This is definitely going to be something that I'm sure people will be looking at and considering when they vote in midterms and things along those lines. Anything else that you want to add, Will, before we wrap this up?
Well, funny you mentioned the midterms. When Roy Cooper announced his campaign for U.S. Senate to replace Tom Tillis, who's gone, the very first thing that he said, he would support if he elected Senate was this sort of stock trading ban. And I went up and, I looked through his own financial disclosures because you can find those for, state level politicians too. He didn't own any stocks. He said he's never owned any stocks throughout his time as governor because even though it's not banned in North Carolina, he just didn't think it was the right thing to do. And he kind of contrasted himself with his Republican opponent, Michael Whatley, who owns hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stocks in companies, mostly in the energy sphere, Duke Energy, lots of oil and gas companies. He worked in that field as a lobbyist for a long time. So, it makes sense that he knows about that field and would, feel comfortable investing. Whatley, for a couple of months, would not respond to my request for comment on whether or not he would support a ban on stock trading. But then once it became clear that Trump was going to back one in his State of the Union, Whatley did say that he would support that policy as well. He hasn't said that he would sell his stocks if elected, but what he did tell reporters actually just yesterday, right before I recorded this, is that if he's elected, he would put them in a blind trust to kind of address some of those ethical conflicts.
And an important distinction there between Whatley and Cooper as well is Cooper's spent much of the past, several years as someone who is a politician within, whether it was governor, attorney general, anything like that. Whereas Whatley has spent more time as a private citizen during this time. So interesting elements for sure. And it, as it tends to be with these on-the-record conversations, Will, this is going to be an ongoing thing that we're going to have to be paying attention to. Thank you to Will for that conversation, and thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download, and for making us part of your morning routine. Find the latest North Carolina news on our YouTube page. Just search WRAL. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.